Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Full Press Fantasy Live on the Full Press Coverage Network, which includes the Full Press Coverage YouTube page, Full Press Coverage Twitch, Full Press Coverage Facebook, video streaming on Twitter as well. If you are on Twitter, the Twitter comments won't appear in the live chat, but everywhere else, Full Press Coverage YouTube, Facebook, Twitch. If you want to comment, interact, ask any questions, feel free. It's Sunday morning. Fantasy football is happening, and of course, that means the standard operating procedures on Sunday morning. I'll talk about some start-sit decisions. I'll also talk about some the inactive active list, and then some later questionable players. I've got a list here of some players I'm dealing with on some questionable players for later games, whether it's the 4 o'clock Eastern games, the Sunday night, or the Monday night games. Because our active and inactive list, which I'll update, will only be applying for the 1 o'clock Eastern games. So basically threefold. Start sit decisions, that 1 o'clock active inactive list, and then the later questionable players. My name is Kyle Semna. I co-host the Full Press Fantasy Pod, and you can probably tell from the Packers gear, Full Press Packers Pod as well. So check out those audio podcasts throughout the week on wherever you find and stream podcasts. So I guess I'll just start off like I do every Sunday morning, talking about my start sit decisions, some of the more difficult ones. I create a spreadsheet for that so I can it'll help me visualize it, and it also helps let me share it with all of you. So here we are sharing this screen. I believe it's working. Oops. There we go. Sharing the screen. Yeah. So what we got here is so a few players that I have difficult decisions for, and there are several categories for uh, these specific, like what are the factors that I'm looking at. So really, the first three are fantasy points themselves. What is the player average? But then also the range of outcomes. What's the least amount of points they've scored in a week, and what's the most they've scored in a week? I also put the on-site projections as well to give me just one extra facet that directly relates to fantasy points. Because at the end of the day, that's why we're making these start-sit decisions. We're trying to figure out which of these players will score the most fantasy points. Frankly, one of the the biggest factors to a player scoring fantasy points is, have they scored fantasy points in the past? Next is targets, and that's specifically targets in the passing game. One of these first decisions is a running back, so maybe less factor, but I want to know who is more involved. The defensive ranking. This is the fantasy points allowed by the opposing defense, but specifically for that position. So if it's running backs, which honestly almost every decision I have to this week seems to be about running backs. A lot of this is fantasy points allowed to the running backs by that specific team, that the team that is the player is facing. Then we have the implied total, the over under. Those are the odds makers lines. And I've talked about this in the past. I like getting the lines Monday morning, and I know the lines will shift, but I want to know what the odds makers thought, what their projection said at the start of the week. And they're going to change the lines based on players being active and inactive, and some of those are legit factors, but they also change their lines based on what people are betting. So I want to know what the odds makers think. So I throw in the implied total and the over under that were set on Monday. Which is 6 days ago. And yes, things do change, but I still want to know what the initial instinct for these odds makers were. Then the goal line grade and the goal line grade difference. So each week I put out an article, the goal line guide, on fullpresscoverage.com. I attempt to predict where touchdowns will come from. Will they be on the ground or through the air for all the teams through the NFL? What's more likely to happen? I create the goal line grades based on how the percentage of plays that those teams have run inside the five, but also pass inside the five, and how often they're scoring touchdowns on those plays. So I end up with a percentage number. Again, everything is split rushing and passing. So I get an offensive rushing touchdown percentage number from inside the five. I get an offensive passing touchdown number inside the five. But I also do everything defensively. What is the percentage of plays that a defense has allowed running backs or players on the ground to score inside the five, and then also the percentage of plays they've allowed passing offenses to score inside the five. So I get percentages for both. I also incorporate just the total number of touchdowns that an offense scores on the ground, and B, a defense allows on the ground, and then do the same thing for the passing game. I also add in the implied totals. So these implied totals do feed into the goal line grade, and they factor in there. Again, the odds makers have set these lines, and part of the goal line guide predicting touchdowns. The teams who score more points are going to more likely have more touchdowns overall as a team. So I wanted to incorporate that in. But what that gives me is a goal line grade for a team's rushing attack and for a team's passing attack. The goal line grade difference is essentially what it is, the difference between those two numbers. And so I'll either give a positive difference or a negative difference. So the negative difference means whatever. So again, most of these are running back. So if you see a negative difference on this, it's because that team has a higher passing goal line grade than a rushing goal line. Now the Rams, I guess I have a couple of Rams pass catchers here. They're at -6, so that actually means the Rams have a higher rushing goal line grade than passing. But again, almost every other player on the sheet has to be running backs. So actually, this last position at the bottom is where I want to start. It's probably my most difficult, which is why I haven't really given an indication which way I'm going to go. Got to start two players between Tutu Atwell, Tyler Higbee, both on the Rams, and then Damian Williams. You don't know who Damian Williams plays for? He signed with the Cardinals. Yeah, he was in the James Conner injury has forced him to look outside the team, and Damian Williams had the second most carries behind Keontae Ingram. So I'd expect him as the main backup. Is that startable? Well, so looking through these factors, this was one of the more complicated ones. Tutu Atwell is such a difficult case. He's been so productive, but as you see here, that production and the targets he's getting will wane or has waned and it has come down since Cooper Kupp has returned. So if you look at Tutu Atwell's season on a whole, he's scored in this league settings 12.85 fantasy points per game. However, in the 2 games since Cooper Kupp returns, that's basically half. That's 6.8. And it's Cooper Kupp's a massive piece. Without him, there was no one to draw targets, so Atwell saw more targets. And his best game came, obviously, without Cooper Kupp. He scored 19.4 fantasy points in his best game. Since Kupp's been back, the best he's been able to score is 9.4. And his targets drip, over the course of the whole season, he has 41 targets. However, if you take just the last 2 weeks and you extrapolate that over 6 weeks, that would only be 18 targets. I believe it's like 6 targets in the last 2 weeks. So the truth is, the big problem I have with this is, frankly, just I don't know what's real. Like, do I just take the last 2 games for Tutu Atwell, or do I take his whole season? So for things like, one of the things I do with this is I usually put in green the highest of each category, who's got the highest average, who's got the best floor, the best ceiling, and then I put in orange whoever's the worst. I left the green parts in terms of who had the best blank between Atwell and Higbee. Because if you look at the season as a whole, Atwell has a better average. But if you look at just the 2 weeks since Kupp's been back, Higbee has the better average. Likewise for ceiling, and likewise for targets earned as well. So that's what makes it tricky, is what's the real Tutu Atwell? Now, the one thing that does work in Atwell's favor, the matchup is the best in terms of so when we're looking at defensive rankings, I'm looking at the higher number being the better defenses, meaning the worst matchup. So seeing Atwell against the 29th ranked defense, that means that the Steelers have allowed I guess that would be 4. They've allowed the 4th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So it's a great matchup relative to, say, that exact same defense has allowed the 8th fewest points to tight ends. So it's a much better matchup for Atwell than it is for Tyler Higbee against that same opponent. Really, all of Damian Williams, the factors that make him viable are the combined over under against the Seahawks, but they don't really benefit. It's not a good game script. So while this is a positive, it almost shouldn't count, because what you want is high over-unders, and if it's a running back, you want them to be leading. If it's a wide receiver, you want them to be behind, because a team leading will likely run more, meaning the wide receivers will see less targets. So the fact that their over-under for the Cardinals is 19 doesn't necessarily work in the game script favor for Damian Williams, who saw 1 target last week. Again, that 6 is extrapolated over, if he had played a full season up to this point, he'd have 6 targets. So he's not really involved in the passing game. However, the rushing goal line grade, is great. 98, I honestly think I'll have to go through the goal line guide, but 98 for a rushing grade, I think is the second highest rushing grade of any team this week. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. I think the Eagles were the only team with a higher rushing goal line grade than the Cardinals. However, the difference isn't much, zero point 0.5. So it was basically almost the same grade. I think it was 97.5 for their passing goal line grade, which is still better than, say, the Rams, who have a higher rushing goal line grade than passing goal line grade. So there's a couple factors working in Williams' favor, but the more I talk through it, the more this complication of Atwell versus Higby, it kind of might just make sense to play both, especially with the concerns with the Rams right now with their run game. Kyron Williams out, Ronnie Rivers out, Royce Freeman, Daryl Henderson, Zach Evans. There might be a scenario where the Rams just don't run the football very much, and you have so many targets that you end up playing just both pass catchers. So I am very tempted to play both Atwell and Higby and just leave Damian Williams on the bench, keep him as an insurance policy. If Keontae Ingram gets hurt, maybe he's startable next week. I think that's the way I'm leaning, because it's either I play both Rams receivers or I play only one and play Damian Williams. I think based on the one thing that really factors in, because it's pretty equal between Atwell and Higby, but that defensive matchup, that's the one thing that really leans towards Atwell. So I'll probably start Atwell for sure. And then it's deciding, do I play Higby? Now I've already got, like, this is all flex. So I can choose from every position. So if I don't play Higby, I have George Kittle in, so I don't need Higby to start in my tight end spot. But so I could play both Rams, or I could play Damian Williams. I'll probably make a final decision after this. Right now, I am leaning though towards Atwell starting. A couple things. Zach Moss. I have quite a few decisions with Zach Moss, and for the most part, I'm gonna just decide to play him, even though the Browns' defense is really tough. It's a much tougher pass defense. I mean, it's still, again, the sixth fewest fantasy points allowed to running back, so it's not a great matchup for Zach Moss. But comparing Zach Moss to Latavius Murray, which I find hilarious. Just Murray playing for Moss's former team. There's a lot of production points that really point towards Zach Moss, and that's because he was just smashing to start the year. Murray wasn't, but that should. I mean, Moss is scoring points, right? Like that is an important factor. More involved in the passing game as well. And with Latavius Murray, I expect to see more work now that Damian Harris is out, but I don't believe Harris was seeing much work in the passing game anyway. So I don't think Murray gets a passing game bump with Harris out. You might just see more carries. Better defensive matchup. The Bills have a much higher implied total than the Colts. The over-under for that game is higher. But then you get to the goal line grades. Both of those favor Zach Moss, which is why I'm going to go Zach Moss over Latavius Murray. I'm even going Zach Moss over Jerome Ford, which in my initial rankings, in which you can find the rankings, just like the goal line guide article on fullpresscoverage.com, I had Zach Moss ahead of Jerome Ford in the rankings. And then I was kind of hemming and hawing, and do I go back to Ford? And then through this start sit spreadsheet, it kind of confirms to keep having Zach Moss over Jerome Ford. I will say Gus Edwards was someone I had pretty high in my rankings. I think inside the top 20. I'm looking at all these factors, especially the Lions, who apparently allow the fewest fantasy points to running backs. That made me lower him to, I think I still am in the RB2 range, but just at the back end of it. Not as confident in Gus Edwards as I was just a few days ago. But anyway, Zach Moss, playing Zach Moss in quite a few leagues. So if anyone's questioning what to do with Zach Moss now that Jonathan Taylor's back, I say go for it. One of my toughest decisions is Salvin Ahmed versus Tyler Algier. This is a league where, we have to start 3 running backs. So that third running back spot can be pretty tricky sometimes, especially in a bye-apocalypse week like this where 6 teams are on bye. And I was kind of hoping Roschon Johnson would be active because that was one guy I was planning to play. He's out this week. So looking between Algier and Salvin Ahmed, between Algier and Ahmed, there's a few factors that are super narrow, and sometimes I'll put that in kind of like a gray to say that, like, it's this player higher, but barely. And then we can see it in 3 instances. So first off, floor. What's the fewest points that either Ahmed or Algier has produced? Ahmed was 1.1 fantasy points. Algier was 2.1, literally a 1-point difference. That's still such a super low floor that, yes, technically Algier gets the point for this one, but it should barely count. Number of targets they've had: 11 for Ahmed, 10 for Algier. So they're basically not involved in the passing game. The goal line grade difference, both favor the both are honestly almost equal. Both teams, both the Falcons and the Dolphins, but it both in both instances, it's their passing goal line grades are slightly higher than the rushing goal line grades. We're talking about -2 to -3. That's almost basically the same, but it is technically favor Algier. All the other categories, though, there's Algiers favored by a significant amount, like ceiling performances. The Algier had that week one game where he had two touchdowns, I believe, which led to this 22.9 fantasy points. Higher projection, higher average. The average, of course, because of that ceiling performance. Both defensive matchups are tough, but Ahmed's against the Eagles is tougher than Algier against the Buccaneers, which is usually the Buccaneers are one of the best run defenses. And yeah, still eighth fewest fantasy points allowed to running backs, but it's not say it's not the Lions. Ahmed has the higher implied total, higher game total. This is the highest over under of the week at 52 and a half. And the overall goal line grade, 86 for Ahmed, only 62 for Algier. The complication with Ahmed, though, is he might be the third string back. And it looks like Jeff Wilson will play. How much work will he get? I'm not sure. I would I would guess that Wilson sees more carries and more opportunities overall than Ahmed, which I think at this point I am leaning towards Algier as the main handcuff. It's just those two. It's just Bijan Robinson, just Tyler Algier, as opposed to Ahmed in a three-way committee. So I think that's where I'm leaning that way. But yes, so that's my start sit spreadsheet, and Joel's here. So Joel, always a great loyal listener, always have great questions. The streak finally end though. Ooh, this is an interesting question. But yeah, last week he unfortunately got it wrong between Kirk Cousins and Justin Fields. And Cousins didn't even really do that well, but he was better than Fields. So sorry, Joel. Sorry to lead you astray last week. However, first up to that point, though, I had gotten every decision right that Joel had asked. So hope to get back in the win column this week, Joel. I'm stuck in camp aside between Tyler Higbee or Dalton Kincaid. What do I say? So first off, I'm going to pull up my rankings. I believe I've got Higbee ranked higher than Kincaid. Oh, I went to the wrong spot. Sorry. So I'm leaning Higbee. I can look at some other factors. I can look at the goal line grades. I know the passing goal line grade definitely favors the Bills because their rushing goal line grade isn't that great. And their passing goal line grade is pretty up there this week. Yeah, I've got Tyler Higbee at tight end 15, Dalton Kincaid at tight end 19. So close. I can certainly understand why you're stuck and can't decide. Again, back to what I was saying earlier about Higbee between like my decision of deciding Higbee or not, because the Rams are dealing with so many injuries to their running backs. To start the year, they had three guys that they planned to put in the rotation. None of those three guys are playing this week, at least not for the Rams. One of them's Cam Akers, who's been traded to the Vikings. Kyron Williams on IR. Ronnie Rivers is out as well, potentially going to IR. With Royce Freeman, Darrell Henderson, and Zach Evans, who, I mean, Evans has been on the team the whole season. They drafted him, but he really hasn't gotten any work, gotten on the field. I could see the Rams and Sean McVay just being really uncomfortable running the football and it just being so many passing opportunities, and their run game will almost exist through the short passing game, which leads to, I think, more towards Tyler Higbee. Also, even when the Patriots are bad, which they are right now, they're still really good at defending tight ends. Like they can shut down that position like no one's business. Even Kelsey, like some years where he's just smashing and has one bad performance against the Patriots. So as great as I have faith in the Bills offense against the Patriots, I view it more as Stephon Diggs going to smash. Gabe Davis is going to do really well. Maybe even James Cook out of the backfield might be an option, but Kincaid's still splitting with Dawson Knox. I think I want Higbee. That's how my rankings reflected. And just looking through my rankings again, that's if I had to re-rank him, that's how I would rank it. So Joel, I say go Tyler Higbee. I think that's the decision I would make. I'm likely going to start him. The more I think about it, in that one league that I showed on the start sit spreadsheet. That yeah, I have confidence that Higbee will at least get the opportunities. Um, Really, and that's just partially because I think every pass catcher will get more opportunities on the on the Rams this week, just because again And maybe they surprise us. Maybe the Rams end up running the ball a lot, but I could just see it being such a pass heavy uh, game script for them, even if they're leading. And again, they might use like the again they might use the short passing game as kind of an extension of the run game, which I think means tight ends especially could factor in there. So yeah. So the one thing that I have not done yet, Higby it is. Yeah, all right. Let's go Tyler Higby. I think again. I know I've got a couple leagues where I'm starting him, Joel. So you and I are both in the same boat there with Tyler Higby. We're hoping for Higby. Um, so yeah, I guess it's not quite 12 noon. So I guess before we get to the active inactive, I'm going to actually talk about the um, the later games. So I pulled out really four players, or really three players that significant these are significant players. Like they're players you want to start if they're active. You do not want to bench them. They are. We'll start with the two players playing at 425. So DK Metcalf. He's been dealing with injuries, it seems the last couple weeks have been questionable, but he's been active. I would expect him to play. However, as the 425 start, the options to replace him once that's announced, if he's announced out, your options are limited. So I would say it's just to make sure that uh, that that you've got guys that you can put in the lineup instead. And so one of the things I actually did in one of my leagues, just to be sure, it's a tight end premium league, so I don't mind playing a tight end. Like, I think on my bench currently, the best option I had to replace Metcalf was Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Don't love that. He's the 3rd string running back. Even if it's a great matchup against the Chargers, I just don't think he's gonna get opportunities to actually exploit that. I imagine if Metcalf's out, that means more targets to everyone else on the team, including the tight ends. So I went up and picked up Colby Parkinson. And if Metcalf's out, I've got enough flex spots that I'm just gonna throw. I mean, I'm already playing 4 tight ends this week. What's the 5th one in a tight end premium league? Just all flexing a tight end in almost every spot. Um, so yeah, just to again see if Metcalf's out, more targets for the other Seahawks players, and frankly, the Cardinals traditionally have been pretty bad against tight ends. So the opposite of the Patriots almost. So I don't mind throwing in Parkinson in that matchup if Metcalf's out. So that might be an option. Honestly, another one is Tutu Atwell. I already talked about it earlier. I'm and I think that this is perfect for Atwell to be a emergency start him if you don't have anyone else to start, and to hold Atwell as in for this instance, DK Metcalf, I think that'd be great. In the other league where I picked up Colby Parkinson, if I had Tutu Atwell available, I'd love to just kind of pick him up and hold him as that backup option. Again, it's Cooper Kupp's back. He's seen a drastic reduction in targets since Kupp's been back. But because of the running backs being injured on the Rams, maybe the pass volume for everyone on the Rams goes up. And so if Metcalf's out, I don't mind throwing in Atwell in that. So if you can get Tutu Atwell, and I know I'm using Tutu Atwell actually to hold for Aaron Jones, who's another player that's the 425 start. I hate like especially for a hamstring injury that's forced him to miss time already. He came back a couple weeks ago against the Lions, either re-aggravated it or probably shouldn't have played because he was still hurt, and they held him out last week. I know the expectations are that Jones is going to play. That's what the reports are today. I kind of believed that as well. I thought if I had to guess, I was going to say he because he practiced limited all week. I'm guessing Jones is playing, but in a couple leagues, I've got Tutu Atwell uh, as a hold. I'm holding him in case Jones is out. I can just plug him in the lineup. Now, there's a couple times, and one of the things that I like to do anyway is just pick up Monday players anyway, because a Monday night player can replace anybody. They can replace someone on a Sunday, or they can replace players on a Sunday night or even a Monday night. So in a couple of these instances where I need a replacement for Aaron Jones, I've got KJ Osborne in one league or Brandon Powell in another. So those Vikings receivers with Jefferson out and more targets for them. I think those are the guys that could be viable to hold as um, hold in case of injury, great class in case of emergency type of players. Um, Now the big one, Christian McCaffrey. What do we do with Christian McCaffrey? It's funny because I've got Jordan Mason in a league or 2, but not in leagues where I have McCaffrey, so I've kinda been stuck to either take a Vikings player or one league, I've got Ronnie Bell as that, like, replacement, and I don't mean he hasn't seen a target, I think, in 2 weeks, so not loving I think I could go pick up Kyle Juszczyk, which might end up doing tomorrow if it looks like McCaffrey's not gonna play. Uh, yeah, one league I've got Josh Oliver, slight tight end premium, so it's not necessarily ideal, but better than taking a 0. Another league I've got Cam Akers. It's a half PPR league, so would like to replace him with a running back. So, yeah, so, like, Christian McCaffrey, it's tough. I mean, you wanna play him, so if you've got Christian McCaffrey on your team, go pick up another Vikings or 49ers player. Ideally, if you can play McCaffrey as a flex, then you can also pick up receivers. Maybe you go pick up a Brandon Powell, or KJ Osborne's probably not available, but yeah, Brandon Powell, um, or a Juwan Jennings. I almost said Jonathan Jennings. That's a quarterback. But yeah, like players like that, those wide receivers, you can replace McCaffrey with, but that's only if you play McCaffrey in the flex. Now, if you're stuck having to, you flexed multiple receivers, and you're only going to play 2 running backs this week, and McCaffrey's one of them. That's fine, but just make sure you've got a. You can't get Jordan Mason or Elijah Mitchell. Go get a Cam Akers, and that way, like you can still put a running back in. The truth is, you don't want to just like willingly bench McCaffrey. You'll bench him if he's out, but for a guy of that upside, the RB1 in fantasy football, you want to play him if he's active. So you want to give yourself that chance to play him. So any league I've got McCaffrey, I'm making sure I've got a Vikings or 49ers player ready to go. That way I can still play McCaffrey if he's active, but not take a 0 if he is inactive. I mean, you might still take a 0 with some of these players anyway, but you won't like go in knowing I'm purposely taking a 0. I'm gonna play the player and hope I get some points. And yeah, sometimes it's really tough to replace, and you might have to make a decision today, and choose to just bench McCaffrey anyway, or set to play him and take the 0 if he's out. So, tricky things with such a high upside player like McCaffrey dealing with the Monday night injury. I know they've already ruled Deebo Samuel out, so, should be a great game for Ayuk and George Kittle, certainly. Alright, so no other start sit questions now, but of course, feel free to keep, anyone listening, wanting to ask any questions, feel free. You can also tag me on Twitter if you want, @Center Says. I'll check through and, see. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna get the active, inactive list. So let me see what let me go I usually go to RotoWire for this. There's tons of sites that have it. I just find theirs super reliable, clean. So I will share with the active, inactive report with everyone. Okay, so week 7, NFL inactives, courtesy of RotoWire. So Atlanta Falcons, no one of fantasy relevance. The tight end John Fitzpatrick's inactive. I think he's been like even the 4th string or even the 5th string tight end. So uh, play Jonnu Smith, play Kyle Pitts. I think they're still both viable starters. For the Baltimore Ravens, there's a lot of defensive players inactive. Safety Marcus Williams is probably the big one, but no fantasy relevant players. Same with the Bills. Nothing really of fantasy relevance on offense. Quentin Morris, the tight end, is inactive, which I think he was active last week when Kincaid was out. So Joel, like to your question of Higby Kincaid, it at least looks like Kincaid is healthy. Like there should be no limitations, hasn't suffered any setbacks. That being said, I'd still go with Higby. Chicago Bears. So this was news. I mean, they announced both of these players inactive a few days ago. Justin Fields and Roshan Johnson. Khalil Herbert's still on IR, which means Dante Foreman gets to start and should get the majority of the carries for the Bears this week. Cleveland Browns QB Dorian Thompson Robinson is inactive. Deshaun Watson is active, so he will be playing. It looks like PJ Walker is the main backup. Also, wide receiver Cedric Tillman is inactive. I mean, between him and David Bell, it's one guy's active, one guy's not, but neither are catching passes, so it won't even matter. Detroit Lions. So David Montgomery's out, running back, and wide receiver Marvin Jones is inactive. And so that means, well, from running back perspective, Craig Reynolds and Jahmyr Gibbs are both questionable through the week. They will both play. I'd expect that Gibbs probably sees we'll say a career high in touches this week, certainly a season high. Without David Montgomery, the first game that I believe this is the first game Gibbs will have played without Montgomery. Marvin Jones being inactive, wasn't really seeing many targets, but suddenly a guy like Khalif Raymond, maybe you can throw him in even if he's the 4th Lions wide receiver. Seems like it's Amon-Ra. Actually high on Jameson Williams this week, which is crazy. I'm usually the lowest on him, but he should do well in this matchup. Good game against the Ravens, be high scoring. Josh Reynolds, I think, is a strong play as well. So those top 3 receivers certainly, and of course, tight end Sam Laporta. So Marvin Jones being out again. The only thing it does is it maybe makes if you're desperate, you can willing to play Khalif Raymond. Wouldn't necessarily love to play Khalif Raymond. I think going to in a couple spots. The Indianapolis Colts tight end Kylen Granson is inactive. They announced this a couple days ago. Shoot, I don't even know who the Colts starting tight end is. Is it Alec Ogletree? Honestly, it might be. I think he was seeing the targets last week. I mean, Mo Ali Cox would still be there. I believe Jelani Woods is still on IR. I'd expect once Jelani Woods comes back, it'll be him. But for now, I think I don't really want to play a Colts tight end. I think that was the case before the season started anyway, just because it is such a committee tight end, and there's not really one guy emerging. It seems like. Las Vegas Raiders. Jimmy Garoppolo is out, and I believe the reports are that Brian Hoyer will start, not Aiden O'Connell, which caught me by surprise in a couple leagues. So yeah, I gone and picked up Brian Hoyer in a couple spots. Um, I'm just looking up on Twitter just to see like specifics, and I there's Jay Felicio. I love Jay. He's such a great guy. At Gman Jay, um, he says that. Um, When you it's just a gif of someone crying, and when you have to decide between starting Tyson Bagent and Brian Hoyer. And here's the thing, and we saw it with Aiden O'Connell a couple weeks ago when he made his NFL debut. I don't love it. So I'd go with Hoyer, honestly. I think I've actually got that decision in the league where I could go Hoyer or Tyson Bagent, and I'm just gonna go Hoyer. I'm gonna go with the guy who's not making his NFL debut as the starting quarterback. He's got Devontae Adams, he's got Jacoby Myers, he's got weapons. I don't love playing Brian Hoyer this week, but I don't think like, I'm playing Brian Hoyer over Mac Jones, over like I just said, Tyson Bagent. The bottom of the barrel guys, I'll play Brian Hoyer over, but there aren't too many more guys, below Brian Hoyer rankings this week. Pull it up and let you know where I have Brian Hoyer exactly. Um, oh, never mind, I still have Aiden O'Connell listed, I should really change that, but yeah, I've got Brian Hoyer at QB 23. So, Gardner Minshew, Mac Jones, and Tyson Bagent are the only ones behind him. Yeah, so, let me just put Brian Hoyer to this list. Oops, my bad. I noticed I made the change in a couple leagues. I actually didn't make the change in my rankings. Sorry about that, folks. Yeah, Brian Hoyer at QB 23 this week, right behind Tyrod Taylor. I've got Watson pretty low, even though he's come back from injury and stuff. But I've got him at QB 21. I just not totally trusting. I mean, if you're choosing between Deshaun Watson and Brian Hoyer, okay, yeah, play Deshaun Watson, but again, not too many guys. Um, so yeah, Brian Hoyer starting for the Raiders for the New England Patriots now. Um, so Malik Cunningham and Will Grier are both inactive. That leads to think that Bailey Zappi is the main backup. That's been kind of an issue of who's behind Mac Jones. As bad as Mac Jones is, everyone else is worse. This is an awful QB room when you think. Now one guy that was questionable this week was Juju Smith-Schuster. He's inactive. Honestly, I thought he was gonna come in and be the Patriots' number 1 wide receiver. It hasn't. It's been Kendrick Bourne. Even when Juju was healthy, Bourne's the one drawing targets. So I don't know that like even if like I've got Juju in a couple dynasty leagues. I think from a redraft perspective, I'm totally fine dropping Juju. Hasn't done nearly enough, and even if he returns from injury, I don't have full confidence trusting him. Kendrick Bourne is the only Patriots pass catcher I really want. If it's a tight end premium or start 2 tight end league, I get Gesicki and Hunter Henry. Henry is active, by the way. He was questionable going to the week, but Hunter Henry is active. I like him better of the 2 tight ends. But yeah, not a great situation for the Patriots passing attack. New York Giants now. Daniel Jones is inactive, so that's 2 weeks in a row that Tyrod Taylor will get the start. Again, he's down there like in the Brian Hoyer range. Yeah, I think if you can play better options, that's good, but again, if you're deciding between Tyrod Taylor and Mac Jones, I know I've got a league where it's a 2 QB league, and that is the decision. I already played Trevor Lawrence. Who's that second QB? I'm gonna go Tyrod Taylor. That's how little confidence we have in Mac Jones. And Tyrod, the rushing floor he provides on the ground, I don't wanna say upside because I don't know if he's gonna necessarily get too many rushing touchdowns, but at least get the yards to make it worth it. Mac Jones, and we've seen him against the Bills have such a low floor. I remember a Bills game, he had 3 pass attempts. Yeah, this was in December, and there was snow. It was, like, really big snow and wind, and the Patriots just didn't feel comfortable passing the ball at all to the point where they only threw the ball 3 times, which is insane. But that also shows how low Mac Jones' floor is. He might have I would argue he has the lowest floor of any quarterback in the NFL. Now his ceiling, he might have a higher ceiling than Daniel Jones because Daniel Jones doesn't score touchdowns. But, I mean, I guess this week, Mac Jones has the higher ceiling since Daniel Jones isn't even going. But yeah, moving on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, no one of fantasy relevance, and honestly the same for the Washington Commanders. So I think that does it for the active and inactive list. That's every team playing at one. It seems like it's a short list, but again, the apocalypse is upon us here. 7 teams on bye. Yeah, don't yeah, Joel's saying it in the comments here. And I believe he's a Patriots fan, so I'm so sorry. Yeah, don't play any Patriots. Again, I'm totally cool playing Kendrick Bourne. As much as it's a tough matchup against the Bills, I expect the Bills will be up by a lot, which means a lot of pass attempts. And I'm cool playing the running backs. Mondre Stevenson was questionable, but he is active. I've got him up there in terms of because I feel like that's the keys to success for the Patriots, minimizing the time that we're on the field, having to run the football. They run the football effect, that's the only chance they have to win the game. If it turns into a passing game shootout, there's no way Mac Jones will be able to keep up with Josh Allen. That being said, I still like Kendrick Bourne. I still like Stevenson. If you're really desperate and wanna throw Zeke, and I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, again, tight end premium leagues or start 2 tight end leagues where the position is so scarce, it makes sense for Hunter Henry and or Mike Gesicki, more so for Hunter Henry. Yeah, I agree, like, it's gonna be limited spots, like, it's mostly just Kendrick Bourne and Ramondre Stevenson. Those are really the only 2 Patriots players I wanna play, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe Joel's right, I shouldn't even play those 2, but those would be the only 2 I'm really considering. I've got a start 2 tight end league with Hunter Henry is good. Those start 2 tight ends when you have to actually put 2 tight ends in your lineup every week, those are tough, and you have to, play a tight end who's not so great each week, but yeah, honestly rocking Hunter Henry, I think most weeks. Yeah, and he's agreeing with me. He would play Tyrod Taylor over Mac Jones. Is true. Again, that's what I'm doing. So yeah, approaching 40 minutes with the Bipocalypse. I don't know if there's anything else really to say. I'll just plug away and say I'm Kyle Senra at Senra Says on Twitter. Follow all the great full press coverage accounts at FPC. First, yeah, at FPC underscore fantasy pod and at FPC underscore Packers. The 2 podcasts I record, the Full Press Fantasy Pod, the Full Press Packers Pod. Uh, do episodes every week. I'll actually be recording the Packers Broncos game reaction later this evening. We'll say after the game is done. Hopefully to have it out either before the Sunday night game or during halftime of Sunday night game. So look for that. Full Press Coverage Packers. Of course, follow the Full Press NFL account for everything NFL related, and at FP underscore coverage for everything Full Press coverage. We got a lot of great groups there, many great shows through the week. Ian and Braden, they do their Sunday morning streams before I'm on again on the Full Press Coverage page. So check that out every week. Appreciate everyone who's watching. I know Joel, the loyal listener and viewer Joel, is here every single week. Always gives me a good question to think about. Again, I guess just to keeping track of it, we're 4-1 so far, Joel, on these decisions. So I'm hoping to get back in the win column after the Justin Fields debacle last week. Tyler Higbee over Dalton Kincaid, and we'll find out what happens. Uh, Everyone, I wish you all a great fantasy football Sunday. Thank you all for watching another episode of Full Press Fantasy Live.